Welcome to Caregiver Chats. Today, I'm talking about safeguarding against fraud and scams. So stay tuned and we'll get into it. Hi, Dr. Lakelyn here. I'm a gerontologist and caregiving advocate for Home Instead, an honor company. Over the years, I've talked to countless families who have shared their stories of loved ones being scammed. Recently, one of my older relatives fell victim to a scam, and it was really sad to see just how distressed she was afterwards. She got a call asking to urgently provide some of her information, and after she did, she realized what had happened. Thankfully, we were able to get family and authorities involved, and we had a positive outcome. But that's not the case for every family. Unfortunately, scammers are getting really sophisticated, and there's a variety of reasons that they choose to target older adults as their victims. We're going to talk a lot more about this today, and I'm looking forward to having an expert on the topic join me. Elder rights specialist Tasha Jones has worked for over 9 years at the local area agency on aging called Connections. She helps older adults and their families every day who are impacted by fraud, abuse, and neglect. This is part of their Elder Abuse Prevention and Awareness program. I'm excited again to have her because her expertise makes her a wealth of knowledge on today's topic. Welcome, Tasha. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It's an honor.
I am really looking forward to our discussion. As I mentioned, this is a topic that has impacted my family, and I know so many families are dealing with instances of fraud and abuse and scams. And so I'm really excited to dive into all of that. But before we do, would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and kind of the work that you do at Connections?
Yeah. So like you said, I've been with the area agency on aging for a little over 9 years. Previously, before that, I was in social work, working with families and the homeless population. Just kind of graduated into the aging population. It's rewarding. It's really nice to be able to help people along their whole journey and their family. Personally, I have been married for 19 years, 2 adult children, and grandbaby will be 8 months tomorrow.
Oh my goodness, you're a grandma? No way.
Yeah,
not possible.
Bonus grandma.
Bonus grandma. Well, that's wonderful and beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing a little bit about yourself. And can you also tell us a little bit more about the Area Agencies on Aging? I refer to that organization a lot. I tell people, if you don't really know where to start when you're becoming a caregiver or caring for an older loved one, start there because there's one that serves every county. But could you just tell us a little bit more about the AAAs so that people know, if they reach out, what they can expect?
Most definitely. So like you said, there is an area agency on aging all across the U.S. Every county has one. So with the area agency on aging, we do have 5 core services that all of us have to do across the state and the nation. It is supportive services, information and assistance to connect to local resources, also case management if they need a little bit more hands-on. Most have health and wellness programs like Tai Chi or bingo size to get people up and moving. There's also nutrition like the home delivered meals. We have a caregiver program that is specifically for caregivers, and then our elder rights program for those that have been abused, neglected, or concerns of such.
I think what's amazing about the AAAs is it covers such a breadth of support. And again, not a lot of people know about them. It's kind of like you don't know about it until you need it. And then even if you need it, you still might not know about it. So thank you so much for sharing. And I actually did my practicum during my graduate studies at our local AAA. Mine's called the Eastern Nebraska Office on Aging, which I know is just neighbors to Connections right across the border. And I was just blown away by all of the services and the dedicated people that they have working at all the AAAs. And one of my favorite programs that I'm still involved with, I still volunteer with, is the local home delivered meals program. Meals on Wheels is another common way that a lot of people refer to it, but that is just a great service that can be so beneficial in helping support people at home. And I love to hear that there's a caregiver program too. Do you have a little bit more information on what kind of things are provided in that program specifically?
I can't speak on specific on every AAA, but ours and then within the state of Iowa is that we do have caregiver support like online through Facebook groups, in-person groups. There's also grandparents raising grandchildren program, which is a very unique population that continues to grow. We do different trainings for caregivers. A lot of them have been virtual just because it is difficult to find care for your loved one. And then just being that support if they just need to vent or just ask some questions, to be that safe person that they can do that with.
That is wonderful. Such needed support for caregivers. And I love that you're meeting them where they're at virtually, which is why I love this podcast, is because people can listen and tune in at any time when it's convenient to them. So awesome. Well, thanks so much for giving us just a better understanding into AAAs. And I know that there's a website, which we'll put in the show notes, where people can do a zip code search to find the local area agency on aging nearest them. And so we'll make sure that everyone has access to that link so that they can find their local AAA. Okay, well, I thought that this was kind of a timely topic to cover. I recently saw the movie Thelma. It's a Sundance Film Festival movie about an older woman who falls victim to the grandparent scam, and then she tries to go get her money back. So it's kind of a comedy. It kind of sheds a little humor on a serious topic. But it really got me thinking about just all of the various scams that are out there. And so when I was thinking about this topic, I thought Tasha would be just the perfect person to talk about this. And so, can you kind of lay some groundwork? Why do scammers target older adults? What is it about older adults that make them more vulnerable to fraud and scams?
Sure. Most older adults are at home. They're lonely. They're isolated. Usually they have money they've been saving, their retirements, their pensions, and they're trusting. They want to help people who are calling. And they also want to be independent. Oftentimes, if those are on a fixed income, they want to be able to find another source of income. And a lottery scam, kind of targets those individuals. I have this, this great opportunity, only $500 to get started, and you can have, $15,000. And that's what, they want to be independent. They want to be able to have their own funds.
That's a really good point. I guess I haven't thought about it necessarily from that perspective of wanting the independence of having your own funds. And I think, when we talk about red flags of scams, anytime you're asked to give a little bit of money to get more money, that to me is a red flag. Would you agree, Tasha?
Agreed.
Yeah. So I think knowing these red flags can be helpful, of course, in avoiding, becoming a victim of the scams. And then in addition to kind of those lottery type scams, what are some of the other common ones that you're seeing right now?
The common one that really target our older adults is forever the grandparent scam.
Yeah.
That's been around for years and continues to cycle back around. There's also, housing scams with, the rising property taxes nationwide, older adults who need to relocate because they can't afford to stay in their home now looking for rentals. There's a lot of rental scams out there.
Really?
Amazon, scams that you get a text message that your package is delayed. Click the link to follow. And online shopping is something that our older adults are getting into. They're becoming more tech savvy, which is great. But it does open that door for other scams. The lottery scam we spoke about. And then with open enrollment time coming with Medicare, that's going to be an up and coming scam. And they're even going door to door and selling insurance. So not only are the scams primarily over the phone and with the postcards, they can come to your house because it's convenient. They have the silver tongue and will tell you what you want to hear and sign here and we'll take care of you.
Wow. Gosh. Well, several of those scams I've even had, show up in my text message inbox. And I'm not an older adult, but I know to kind of push the report junk, on my cell phone. And I know to delete those emails. But if you're kind of new to using email or the internet, you might, be a little more vulnerable to those types of scams.
Correct. And a lot of times, again, coming back to the independence that our older adults want to maintain as much independence as they can. So the more that they can do themselves, the more they feel more independent until something happens.
Yeah. Well, and I think that there also sometimes embarrassed or afraid to tell their family that they have fallen victim to a scam. And that can be really hard because one, I mean, the older adult, we want the caregiver to be in the know on what's going on. But it also, is an extra, burden, worry on the caregiver too. So I think it's also important to have open dialogue between the caregiver and the older adult or amongst the family about potential scams and kind of keep each other posted on the latest so that everyone has kind of open communication and they don't then feel embarrassed to come forward if they are suspicious. And that's one thing that I think I tell a lot of older adults and caregivers is just, if something sounds too good to be true, it probably is. So just get really suspicious.
Oh, for sure. And that's what's hard is, thinking about, the generations and our older adults, they are very trusting because, the world wasn't so, dark and evil as it is now. I mean, scammers, that is their job. And they continue to grow and they're really good at what they do, unfortunately. So like you said, to normalize that conversation that scams are out there, not waiting for it to happen before you start the conversation is, talk about it all the time. And, we do a lot of education with our caregivers, especially if they start, monitoring money, and be able to do that assistance is educating them on what to look for as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that, organizations like yours and programs like yours help to do some of that education. And so that is, I think, wonderful. I know that there's a lot of resources, online that can help. But I think I would love to talk maybe about some general kind of tips on, I mentioned like get suspicious. That is one tip. But what are some other tips, Tasha, that you would tell families as they are maybe approached by these various scams?
Sure. So our Iowa Attorney General's office, they have a very fun acronym, and it is called TIPS, TIPS. So it's TIPS is there's a threat. So there's, something is happening, you have to act right now. I is the immediacy. Right now it has to happen. P is a payment, and then S is a secret. So you don't tell people. So if any of those parts are in a conversation, you should have the red flags up. Another one that we provide to, especially with the grandparent scam, is if somebody is traveling, is create a safe word. So if a grandchild is going to be traveling and does happen to call grandma and say, hey, I'm in Oregon, I need some help, what's a safe word? That way, if they really do need help, they know that it is their grandchild.
That is such a great tip because in our family, the grandparent scam happened. Thankfully, we were able to get ahead of it, but I know my grandma was so flustered, and it really plays on the emotion of the older adult. And of course, grandma or grandpa wants to help their grandchild. And in our family, I know that luckily my aunt was at home with my grandma when it happened. And so they said, well, can we get your information and call you back? We're just going to try calling the grandson to make sure he's okay. And of course, the scammers were like, no, we need to take care of this now. He's not going to be able to answer, playing on that immediacy and emotion. But my aunt is very savvy on this kind of thing and said, no, we're going to call you back if we find out there's an issue. And they got a hold of him. He was, at work. He was just fine. And thankfully we were able to really avoid that. So I love the opportunity to create a safe word amongst the family. And that could really help put a lot of people's mind at ease when it comes to these types of scams. And I like that acronym of TIPS. So again, the T stands for what?
For threat.
Threat. Okay. And that is one thing that often the scammers kind of come up with is there's some sort of threat, some sort of immediate opportunity. And that can be scary. I think especially when you talk about, taxes or anything kind of government related, no one wants to be in trouble with the IRS or, they don't want to get behind on their taxes. So those kinds of threats can be really kind of unnerving for some folks. But I know I've even gotten fraudulent types of mortgage related letters in the mail. And I notice it does not have my bank's letterhead, and it doesn't even have the bank's full name. So it's things like that you can kind of be looking for. Is that right? When it comes to the documents.
Such a busy world. It's just important for us of all ages to slow down and to look for those things, misspelled words, the grammar, the letterhead, the links, all of that is just slow down before you click, before you call, just check it out.
Absolutely. And then when it does happen, how can families report it? Because I know that some people are probably like, oh, well, the police can't do anything. There's no way to get the money back. But I think it's so important to report no matter how big or small the scam, because hopefully this can help us catch these bad guys or however you want to say it. But I think the more that we can report, hopefully they can start to track some of these scams.
Oh, for sure. So we always say start with the local police, but like you said, a lot of times you don't get any, money back. Talking with your bank, depending on how you sent the payment, maybe that could be stopped. If it's a gift card, there are some numbers to call again to see if the gift card has been used. Maybe they can stop it. Federal Trade Commission, the Better Business Bureau, even talking with your local AAA that, we can help file some of those reports and be able to. Sometimes our older adults, they do experience a scam and now they, are having difficulty paying their utilities or paying for their medicines that they need. And a AAA might have assistance to help while they're rebuilding. We always recommend to check your credit report at all ages. Oftentimes our older adults, when they hit, 70, they're like, I don't need to run my credit report. But just because you're not using it doesn't mean somebody else isn't.
Gosh, I remember there was a set of commercials years ago where it was all about somebody using your credit or your identity. And they were kind of comical, but also a little kind of scary. So that is such a great tip to check your credit report regularly and often. And I appreciate all those resources that you shared, Tasha, and we'll be sure to put those in the show notes so that folks can report if a scam happens. And I think, throughout the whole process, being sure that we're not shaming or blaming the older adult when they fall victim to a scam. I think that that's so important because I think that goes back to that trust and transparency. And the reason why sometimes they don't get reported is because they don't want to be embarrassed. So do you have any tips for family caregivers on that kind of topic or how to avoid kind of the blame?
Sure. And like you said, it's very frustrating for caregivers, when you're trying to pick up the pieces of a scam that happened. And it is a lot of work sometimes to set things up to be secured again. But the main thing is just to listen to them, and scams happen to people of all ages. And, it's just, again, setting up those security measures. We recommend not taking away, the bank card and the credit card, just helping guide them. Creating like a safety plan or some spending measures that way. Just listening to them. And, if the caregiver has questions on how to have the conversation, is again, call your local AAA and speak with the elder rights specialist to get some tips on the specific situation and some specific resources that may be available. We've done some family meetings before with individuals, so we can be a neutral person to not only educate the caregiver, but also to empower their loved one so they can continue their independence and also be safe.
I love all of those tips. And I think setting up kind of those safety measures or parameters can be really helpful. Or maybe, it is kind of a regular check-in of the finances, like going over the bank statement every month just to make sure that all of the transactions are accounted for. And I think that having those conversations ahead of time can be helpful. And the bank probably is an ally too. I know my mother-in-law was a banker for many, many years, and she saw so many potential scams, and she was able to kind of be the gatekeeper to some degree to say, hey, before we send this money, let's get in touch with your daughter or your son. And so I think sometimes using your bank as an ally can be another just resource to kind of get ahead of those types of things.
Oh, for sure. Especially in our smaller communities and more rural areas, those are the key people because they know what the normal spending habits are. They can start to recognize that. And we've, gotten some calls from banks because they were concerned as well. that something doesn't seem right. It happens so quickly. And sometimes the scams start off small amounts and then they just gradually get bigger. Even talking with, the financial individuals, if there is like an IRA or, some kind of investment that may start being affected, just having those conversations before something happens. Prevention is always important.
Absolutely. Yes. The financial planner is another great person to kind of have on your team as you navigate these types of issues. And I think that you mentioned something that we haven't really talked about yet. Kind of sometimes it's not a one-time scam. Sometimes it's kind of, I don't know if you call it like grooming. Especially, I think we see this in those romance scams because we're seeing more older adults online dating or being approached on Facebook by somebody who wants a friendship. And then they start to ask for money, and it might start out for small amounts and then grow as they quote unquote build trust, even though we know that's not what they're doing. But they kind of, again, play on that emotion, play on the relationship. So are those kinds of things something you're seeing more often, Tasha?
We are. I was just visiting with somebody a few months ago, and they're like on the bottom of Iowa, but they drove up to Des Moines, which is about 2 hours away, to meet Sandra Bullock because they've had a relationship for a year and a half and they were going to meet up. So they were sending money to Sandra. They were going to meet up with her in Des Moines. And they really believed that relationship happened. If you follow, Hollywood, Sandra Bullock doesn't need money from some, older adult in Iowa. But it is a really deep relationship that they have with the individual. So that's a tough part. We have to work with individuals is they're grieving a relationship that they think is real. So us coming in and trying to say that it's fake, it's a long process.
Wow. I never considered the grief part of it. It is very emotional. As we've been talking about it, these individuals that are scamming or being fraudulent, they do play a lot on those emotions. And then, as we get older, some individuals do have cognitive impairment. And so that is something that can be challenging. And even, I know that I worked with a client who she had some cognitive impairment and she was getting so many solicitations for donations. These weren't bad organizations. They were legitimate organizations, but they, would send her requests for donations, which we all get. I mean, if you donate to an organization once, then you'll get mail from them, it seems like every week, which isn't a bad thing, especially if it's a good cause. But she was giving to every single letter that came because she thought it was kind of a bill. And so what we were able to do is her home instead caregiver would intercept the mail and sort through it and sort out the donations and only give her the mail that was really important or pertinent. We worked that out with the family, and we still allowed her, the family allowed her to donate to a couple of those organizations. She was an animal lover, so we reminded her, kind of had like a little magnet on the fridge to say, this is the organization that you donate to. It's such a wonderful cause that you support. And then we're kind of able to redirect her attention after a conversation like that. So even those kinds of things, just being mindful of how much they're spending or donating on a regular basis. That's why those kind of check-ins can be so helpful from a financial perspective, just to make sure that they're not overspending, because we know, as you mentioned, Tasha, many older adults are on a limited income. And so these types of things can be very devastating to them financially.
Yeah, and it's great that the caregiver was able to still honor her passion and what she wanted to do. So she still had that independence with some protections in place.
Absolutely. And I think when, as a gerontologist, I'm always focused on how can we enhance the independence and the dignity and respect of the older adult. And so I think if we involve them in these conversations and set up a plan and educate, then that does empower them and help them to remain independent. And if we're able to also protect their assets too, that goes a long way in preserving that independence, because, unfortunately, if their assets are taken away, then their options might become more limited down the line when they need care or support, or they might have to rely more and more on family. And so that while this is kind of an isolated issue of this conversation, it's not an isolated issue by any means, because it does have kind of that trickle down waterfall effect into other areas of life.
Oh, for sure.
Well, and another thing that I wanted to bring up, it's a little more kind of sensitive, is sometimes we see family or friends as the ones that are financially abusing or even physically abusing an older adult. And so I thought we could spend a little bit of time on that. I know we could talk about that probably for an entire different episode, Tasha, but sometimes we do see some financial abuse from members of the family or within that kind of social network. So do you have any examples of that, or any tips on maybe signs to look for that kind of thing is occurring?
Sure. And like you said, we do see that a lot, and it's really unfortunate. We have caregivers or, family that wants to be helpful, and it starts off small. Some gas money here, some groceries there. They may believe that the money is there so they can spend it now. Maybe they're having their own financial troubles and they just need a little bit of help right now. And then it just continues to grow from that. So some tips that we have, we share with other family is stay involved as much as possible. Don't let it to just be that one person, because we do see a lot of caregiver neglect, which is really passive a lot of times. They don't mean to do it. It just happens because they're stressed and there's an opportunity to find some relief. So having a check and balance for the caregiver is also important. So if they start to feel stressed, they have a safe person they can speak with. Or having a different person manage the finances and somebody manage the other needs for their loved one. Really keeping the family intact and having it be a team or a village aspect of it.
Yeah, I really like that checks and balances that you mentioned, because sometimes, like a healthcare power of attorney and a financial power of attorney are the same person. And for some families that logistically makes sense, but that could be to the family's detriment at some point. And so I really like that kind of takes a village, keep kind of in the know when it comes to the finances so that we can throw up those red flags if we ever need to. Gosh,
and,
so important.
And the great thing with the AAA is, we can be able to serve the older adult, the caregiver, and connect them both to the community resources. If we do have a caregiver that was caring for mom and just recently lost their job and now they're in a financial, crisis, we can get the caregiver into some other supports to help them in their life as they're caring for their loved one.
That's so wonderful to know. I think that a lot of people don't know that the AAAs, while the focus is on older adults, it's also on the caregiver. And so I think that can be a great first step for caregivers in so many aspects, but especially if they're finding themselves in a situation where maybe there's some financial abuse happening, to reach out to their local AAA. And again, we shared the link in the show notes. And if you just kind of Google Area Agency on Aging search, then there's a website called is it the Elder Care Locator? Is that what it's called? Okay, Elder Care Locator, and you can type in your zip code, and the local Area Agency on Aging will pop up, and you can just reach out. And I love the information and assistance that each AAA has, because they're kind of the one-stop shop that then will help you get connected to the other aspects of the AAA, so that you can get the help and support that you need.
Yes.
This has been just so insightful, Tasha, this conversation. And as we kind of wrap up, are there any other tips or any final thoughts that you would leave with our listeners when it comes to this topic?
We always say that aging is happening to everybody every day. So the more that we could get the information into the hands before you need it, the better. So just connecting with your local AAA, having a family meeting on what's it going to look like for caring for your loved one before it actually needs to happen. Sometimes you can plan it. Sometimes it's mom needs to, move in with the daughter right away. And there's that transition it's just quick. So just creating that plan before you need it is really important. And then again, having that naturalizing and normalizing that conversation that scams happen. And how to set up those protection measures before your loved one experiences a scam.
Yes, absolutely. I like the normalizing conversation. And maybe people could go watch that movie, Thelma. It was really cute, I have to admit. I watched it over the weekend and we were laughing out loud. So that could be just a great conversation starter. Or, Tasha, I know you had shared with me AARP. They have a lot of great resources around this topic, but they have a podcast all about the various types of scams. And I was kind of, after you told me about it, I was perusing all the topics and I was blown away. And it's not just older people that are on this podcast. People of all ages, as you mentioned, are being targeted for so many different types of scams. And we don't want everyone out there to be afraid to go out into the world after listening to this podcast, but just have more of a heightened awareness.
Right. And it is difficult that, scammers are out there and that's their job. And it's just slow down. Having a person you can check in with before you send any money. If you won the lottery, congrats. But look into it before you send any money to pay for the taxes and the fees. Don't click the link. And again, it's just slowing down a little bit and just taking some notes to do your own research before clicking anything or calling anybody back. And not to shame somebody if they come to you with a question because it sounds like a scam. Is they're asking for help. Let's, seize that opportunity.
Yeah, I really like that last point you just made, Tasha, about, welcoming those kinds of questions, because then you can do that research. And I know in the instance that I shared earlier about my mortgage, I went directly to the bank and asked, hey, I received a letter about the mortgage. Do you need anything from me? And they said, nope, be just sure to throw that away. So, go directly to the source of where they're saying that information is coming from. Because another great tip I always share is if somebody calls you asking for any bank or personal information, get suspicious. But if you're calling the bank and you are calling the reputable number that is the true number, and they're asking you to confirm maybe your bank information or your first and last name, then, you can share the information then because you've initiated the conversation. But it's when they're calling and saying that they need your personal information to get you that lottery winning or something of that sort. Those are the times to really get suspicious.
Yeah, it's okay to ask questions. I think a lot of times our older adults, they don't want to ask questions because they are very trusting. Caregivers, they are very busy trying to balance out multiple lives, but it's slowing down, asking questions, and just to verify, question everything.
Yeah. Well, Tasha, thank you so much for sharing today. I've learned a lot and I hope that our listeners have too. And I just appreciate all you do in your role. I know at times it probably is hard, but the work you're doing is really important to help support families as they go through this.
When I thank you for this opportunity, just to share again that, to check in with your local AAA, it's like a hidden secret in your neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you can check out the show notes for the AAA website. Thanks again, Tasha. I hope to have you back again sometime soon.
Thank you.
As we wrap up today's episode, I want to thank Tasha again so much for joining me today. It's my hope that the information we discussed can help you and your loved ones avoid falling victim to scams. If you have a story to share on this topic, I invite you to email me at caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. That's caregiverchats@homeinsteadinc.com. I hope you'll join me for the next episode of Caregiver Chats, where we'll be talking more about planning ahead to ensure your well-being as a caregiver. I'm going to be joined by Nancy Griffith and Catherine Lord of the Glowing Older podcast. It's always fun to connect with fellow podcasters. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss this wonderful episode. I also invite you to follow us on Facebook at Home Instead Inc. That's Home Instead INC for previews of upcoming episodes, caregiving tips, and more. You can find all of the links in today's show notes. Thanks for listening, and please remember to take good care of yourself while you care for others. Caregiver Chats is brought to you by Home Instead. If you're looking for in-home care to support you on your caregiving journey, please visit homeinstead.com to learn more.